The big question is Intel, this side, versus AMD for video editing. Which one is the best and which one should you go for? Well, after this video, hopefully this question will be much clearer to you, which one is right for you and for your workflow.
Licensing Windows has never been easier and cheaper. Go to whokeys.com, search for Windows 10 Pro license, or click on the link in the video description below. Purchase the license and use the code TN20 to get a 20% discount. Paste the key into the activation settings and you're all done. By the way, this license also works for Windows 11 when upgraded from licensed Windows 10. Check out whokeys.com in the video description below.
So then I want to talk about the new platform, especially now here in 2022, which is the right one for you. I have tested and benchmarked the 12th gen and I've got lots of Ryzen systems on my channel. So I want to give you like a conclusion or different sides to think about. So after watching this video, you're going to be like, do you know what? This works better for me or this works better for me. First point I'm trying to make is that actually comparing these Intel like 12th gen versus Ryzen 5000, for example, it's not quite equal, because with Intel you're also getting the iGPU inside the processor. Obviously make sure you do buy the right processor, because if you go without the iGPU you're gonna be losing out a lot of performance. But for a video editor that is a big thing. But Ryzen doesn't have the iGPU inside, it's just the processor, so they're not like quite equal. But for video editing performance, we're going to see which one is better. Point number 2 is Intel's 12th gen, now the new platform, supports DDR4 and DDR5, and there's some benefits with it as well as some of the downsides. So as a video editor, the DDR5 can be up to 10%, according to my testing, better on video editing than DDR4. And I'm testing quite a low-end DDR5 actually, and quite a mid-range DDR4 as well. So the DDR5 has a lot more potential, so it could be even better. But this is in DaVinci Resolve about 10%. In Premiere Pro, I'm not seeing that big of a difference at the moment. It could be because I'm having to run the DDR5 a bit lower speeds at 4000 MHz rather than 4800 MHz. But when we're running 4800 MHz in DaVinci Resolve, then it's about 10% faster than DDR4. Now, I recommend you to go check out my DDR4 versus DDR5 if you want to see different programs and how does this react. I did over 100 benchmarks over there to figure out which one is better for creators, so feel free to check that out. But basically, DDR5 is so much more expensive and it doesn't give you that much performance at the moment, so DDR5 kinda isn't worth it at this point in time, early 2022. But it's getting better, everyone's moving on more to DDR5, so the supply and everything's gonna improve during the year. So if you're watching this like in June, July, or later on in 2022, then the situation could be a lot different than right now. Point number 3, the iGPU that I mentioned to you before is an absolute huge thing. So please don't make that mistake by going with a variant of the 12th gen CPUs and there isn't a GPU inside, because you're going to lose a lot of performance. It can be up to 40% better with the iGPU, because there are some killer encoders and decoders inside this iGPU. The iGPU doesn't have like a lot of, graphics power, but it has some killer encoders and decoders. For video editors, that is a huge thing, because H.264, H.265 codecs can be decoded on this, and these are the best encoders at the moment on the market, like better than even Apple M1 Max according to benchmarks, and also better than the NVIDIA built-in encoders. So they're very good for creators. So the live playback or live editing with some of the mirrorless camera codecs, H.264, H.265, is absolutely like the best that there is with Intel 12th gen CPUs. Like for example, the comparison of like overall score is so good with the iGPU like acceleration, and the live playback score is so good on all of these 12th gen CPUs that even the i5 12600K is slightly better than the 5950X in overall score. But that's mostly because of this iGPU, and that boosts it massively higher and it just plays them back much better. But then when you look at the other scores like rendering and exporting and, you know, other parts of the actual benchmark for video editors in Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve, then the i5 isn't as good, obviously, as the, you know, 5950X. But the point I'm making is that iGPU is an absolute killer thing. Point number 4 is that Ryzen has more GPU muscle. So what does that mean? Basically, that if you are editing more than 4K codecs and more like cinema camera codecs, that's a RAW, different RAWs, Canon RAW, Blackmagic RAW, you know, Red RAW, any other RAW, then Ryzen systems, in my experience, are much better and much powerful in playing that back. For example, they have no problem playing back like 8K footage, 6K footage, absolutely no problem. Red 8K, Red 6K, no problem. Even the 5900X, which is only 12 core CPU, it's got no problem doing that. Whereas all the Intel 12th gen chips, in my experience, in the timeline performance, they kind of start to really struggle like from 5K onwards, unless it's H.264, H.265 codec. But like when we're talking about RAW, the Ryzen is like the killer thing. So if your editing process includes RAW from Red or Blackmagic RAW, Canon RAW, then the Ryzen is like just has more power than just the, you know, hybrid cores, power and efficiency cores. Feel free to check out my timeline performance on 12900K, 5950X and 5600X even, and then all the 12600K, 12900K, you can find it on the channel, like Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve, all is there. You can like dive deeper into to really see some of the codecs. I'm testing tons of different codecs. So if you're really deciding which one is the right one for you, then you can really like see which one is better. But at the same time, if you're using mirrorless camera codecs that have H.264, H.265 codecs, then the Intel chip is much better. For example, Canon R5, you know, the like notoriously bad codec is R5, H.265, 10-bit, 60 frames per second, 422 codec, which is an absolute killer in any system. Any of the 12th gen chips, even the i5, is gonna run through it no problem at all. Even without the dedicated graphics card, it's gonna breeze through like butter because of the iGPU inside. Point number 5 is stability. Now, if you are taking video editing seriously and this is your like daily job, then this is like one of the main points to consider for you, because the Ryzen system is more stable. There is less, you know, hiccups. It's more renowned, it's more refined. It's got lots of updates. It's been like in the system for like over a year, getting like a year and a half or something like that already. So there is a lot of like results and actual testing to make this system stable. With the 12th gen, there is a lot of new things, and I've made complete another video about it, like going into a little bit more some of the issues, so feel free to check that out on the 12th gen issues. But basically they are improving week by week and month by month. It's getting better, and I'm already seeing it much better performance, much more stable performance, and even DDR5 and all of this system issues than before. But if you're still working daily and you're earning, you know, money by video editing daily on a system, then stability is much better on Ryzen than on Windows like 11 and 12th gen at the moment. So if you want something that's pretty much plug in and play, then the Ryzen's the one. But if you are happy to have a little bit of a better performance depending on your workflow, as you can see over here, and maybe potentially have some issues, then this 12th gen is like better than Ryzen 5000 in some of the cases. Now there could be issues, there could not be issues, but there's just that question mark of the stability isn't quite as good as the Ryzen, if that makes sense. Point 6 is the price. Which system is cheaper and which is more affordable for you? Now, when we look at it, the Ryzen system, there is a lot more options than 12th gen options. I know Intel just released all the, like, they've got, I don't know, 20, 40 or 56 different variants of this 12th gen chips. But by more options, I mean there is more motherboards for Ryzen. There is different options of motherboards. There's absolutely tons of stuff you can choose for, and really like fine tune it to your workflow, your needs, what you really need. And the motherboards are cheaper and the processors are cheaper as well when you go with Ryzen. Even the Ryzen processors are now dropping in price because of the 12th gen, which is good for us. Competition, boom, we're getting Ryzen systems even lower, which is fantastic. So on the lower end of the budget, Ryzen could be like a better choice. But what makes this very difficult in this point that I'm trying to make is that this iGPU inside there lifts the performance so much even on the lower end ones, which means that you don't need that high end of a GPU to get a good like video editing performance. For example, like Ryzen 9s or Ryzen 7s or even Ryzen 5s, you probably need to get a RTX 3070 or onwards to get a really good solid performance out of it if you're doing like very high end, and depending on your complex of the editing project. But with this system over here, the iGPU is so good that you might be just able to save a lot of money on the GPU and go with like RTX 3060, 3050 or anything that's really affordable and can go with your budget, because the iGPU inside is really good. Now that kind of only makes sense if you go in and editing a lot of mirrorless camera codecs. If you're doing a lot of raw, like I mentioned before, Ryzen kind of can be a bit more affordable. But it's a serious point that because of the iGPU, you can actually buy cheaper GPU for a video editing rig. At the same time, if we're looking at the high-end motherboards, Intel is more expensive on the Z690 motherboards than on the Ryzen X570 motherboards. And also there's less Z690 motherboards out there than there is X570 motherboards out there. But the Z690 also offers a lot more features. It's like very normal to see 4 M.2 slots that are all PCIe 4.0 speeds, for example. For Ryzen, that's not so common, and we're starting to like have some switches in there and lose some other features or something like that. The Z690 boards have more features and it's easier to see like Thunderbolt ports and things like that on there, but you're also paying a premium, and it's a little bit hard to find DDR4 versions of any of the motherboards. So when we're looking at the price overall, you really have to look at your situation, because like if you put all aspects on the scale, then they kind of cost the same amount. The systems are pretty much the same. It's not that different, unless you go with the DDR5 motherboard, then the price is obviously out of the window. But DDR4 and all of this, it's pretty much the same. So to add to this point, or add a 0.7 over here, if you want to check out any of the AMD best bang for buck builds, then feel free to go check out some of those builds on my channel. They're still very solid builds and very solid video editing builds, because I think the tech has improved a lot more than the cameras have in the last year. So we have much better computers playing back like similar type of video codecs than we had a year ago. There's also Intel systems on the channel, so if you really want to get into video editing, there's a few different options on the channel. So find a build that you like the theme and the performance like, and then just go with that one, and just go checking it out to fit it into your workflow. And last thing I want to mention between those two is the power consumption. Ryzen chips run cooler than the Intel chips. Like, this is just like that's what it is. They don't consume as much power on the like full-on utilization of the motherboard, but at the same time they are not as power efficient as the Intel chips. So you're like, what are you saying over here? So basically, if you are doing the same test or video editing, then actually Intel 12th gen chips use less power making the same task, because it's not often that you see 100% utilization on your CPU unless you're like exporting, and even then you have to have a certain codec or certain things to get CPU 100% utilization. So if you're looking to save like electricity and power, then even the 12900K is actually more efficient than any of the Ryzen 9 chips. They're just consuming less power because the idle power can be very low compared to this idle power on the Ryzen. Ryzen idles much higher powers than that. But at the same time, the turbo boost power consumption is high on Intel. Intel can pull up to 240 watts from the socket compared to like 150 or somewhere around there with Ryzen. If you have PBO enabled, maybe 190 or something like that. So it's much less than the Intel one, which basically means that you do need a higher cooler than on the Ryzen system for Intel system, if that makes sense. But the situation isn't as bad as you think. The 12900K can still actually be cooled quite well even with air coolers. Feel free to check out my can the 12900K be air cooled on my channel, because I put lots of budget ones over there, and even like the high-end coolers like from the Noctua, you know, NHD 15 or something like that, it can keep it cool and you shouldn't really like worry about it. It's a little bit hotter than Ryzen or normal. If you're used to you know, seeing like, I don't know, 60, 70, then it might be 70, 80 or 80, 90, something like that on the Intel chips, but it's still not thermal throttling. And I was able to cool down the cooler or keep it, you know, within the limit and without thermal throttling, even with like an $80 cooler from Noctua NHU 14S or something like that. So the situation isn't as bad, but if you're doing a lot of rendering or 100% utilization of the CPU, I really recommend you to go with at least 360mm AIO for the 12th gen. It's just a little bit better at consuming the power, and you're actually using less power, and it's just better to run that a little bit cooler. So I highly recommend to go with like a high-end AIO rather than high-end air cooling. So what I'm saying is, if you go with a 12900K, just bear in mind you have to get pretty much a 360mm AIO or at least something equivalent. But with Ryzen systems, it's much easier to cool. Like, you can slap on pretty much anything on and it will cool it down. Any air coolers, higher end air coolers, mid-range end coolers will cool it down. It just runs a lot cooler than the Intel chips. But then when you go i7 or i5, the situation isn't as bad, but they're still very, you know, good chips, something like that. So hopefully now you have a little bit of a better idea which one is for you. So overall, I think if you do a lot of mirrorless camera editing, then the 12th gen is a better option for you. If you're doing a little bit of mixed, you know, raw and cinema cameras, and maybe high-end resolution, 6K, 8K, something like that, mixed codecs, then the Ryzen system is probably better for you. Let me know what you think and what's your experience. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. If you're new here, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks guys for watching. Bye bye.